Well, welcome everybody. I think it's a pretty magnificent group of people here with some really diverse sentiments and perceptions of peace and being able to be part of a greater body of human movement toward peace. I'm a Kungarrikan woman. My father is non-Indigenous. He's a retired school teacher and Church of England minister, and my name just perfectly deals with that part of the western side of my family, being bishop, and he's a priest. He's also retired. But my mother is Kungarrikan, and her mother is the only child of my only female child, and so too is her mother, an only female child in the Kungarrikan dynasty. I live on country in the Finniss River Land Trust. I work on country and I study at the Institute, Bachelor Institute, for my PhD in all things Kungarrikan. My whole professional life has been about building bridges. It has included working in restorative justice, working to empower the equality of Aboriginal people and to put it in everybody's face, that where our history is tied up with the perceptions and interpretations of the colonial science model, that our forefathers and ancestors were brutes and nothing, they were less than flora and fauna. And so in many ways that same violent rhetoric has permeated policy. As you're all very well aware, stolen generations has had a devastating impact across Australia for nearly every single Aboriginal language group, which also includes language group across the Australian national frame. And that part of Australia's very dark and sinister history comes with and I'm meaning to place gender in there for a specific reason. The patriarchy of colonialism that has so harmed the human spirit of Aboriginal people. And so I'm trying to build a way in which Aboriginal methodologies can be recognised as being thousands of years old, because the social organisation and structure of Aboriginal people was reciprocal and the word I've forgotten, egalitarian by nature. There were things that were sacred to men and secret for men, just as there were for women. However, the nature of raising children and of working in a collaborative way was based on the notion that this is the most arid nation in the world. And if you don't work collaboratively together, you are bound to be to die out. And we don't have any beasts that we can corral. Kangaroos can't be corralled. And birds can fly away. And those sorts of things. The hunter-gatherer image was more inclined to be seasonal, and to bridge some of these gaps that, the Keith wind shuttles and the culture wars have displaced the notion that Aboriginal people firstly are human beings and that they held social superstructures because they were connected to everything and everyone. So that notion has followed me or taken me down this big road where I was working as a statewide manager of the West Australia's Aboriginal Dispute Resolution Service, and then at the same time being appointed by the Federal Attorney General to come on board and represent Indigenous interests in the very same things, such as courts, tribunals, and alternative dispute resolution. So I've tried to contribute as much as I can, and I'm tired of hearing my own voice. I feel like crying right now with the frustration of what it is like to repeat myself over the last 25 years, saying the same thing. The same thing. Procedural fairness is ADR. Human rights, that tool for effective human rights is ADR. Like free, prior and informed consent is dispute resolution. Equality of service and listening and enablement for people to make decisions that will affect themselves is self-determination. And the only way we can move forward is through this tool of peace building and decision making and governance and conflict management or conflict resolution. So I've picked these and pulled them together and said, well, they're all the same thing. ADR is a tool for human rights, for Indigenous rights, for social justice, and for procedural fairness, because everything that anybody would ever want to be making a decision about, well, they'd like to be involved in shaping how that decision might go about. So that's why I get very impatient, and I've got entirely far too much to say about what I'm sharing with you right now. So you might see me as a cranky old woman who's got too many idealistic aspirations, but the reality is, and the truth has been spoken in this forum just a few moments ago, is that until we've tidied up our backyard, how the hell can we look out there and build better relationships with other nations that also have Indigenous people who that country persecutes and robs them of a truth. The truth is Australia is a First Nations country because the land was never given away. It was never ceded. No one said, yes, you've got that for this. There was no quid pro quos. It was taken. I think this saga in Australia's ability to untangle itself from the pretense of law as imposed, as if it were indeed the law of life. And the law of life in Aboriginal settings is about reciprocity. It is not as in some communities where there's riots and there's competition over resources. Traditionally, it was about reciprocity and the greater good of everybody, because in this country, there was more propensity to die of starvation or lack of thirst, or because you couldn't feed yourselves, or because of the terrible winters you might endure as a single unit living in isolation to other human groups. So I know I've talked about a lot of things, but I'm incredibly passionate about raising peace in the heart of Australia. And I mean it quite literally. The heart of Australia is the way our governments do business to us rather than with us at the table as equal human beings interested in our own futures. And if we all placed ourselves in that same situation where the government is going to make rules about you, which they do, then you're going to be wanting to vote for people who are going to be substantively superior in their enlightened state to use restorative approaches, to have truth, to work in peace and in transparency, to be ethically mindful and enable others to do so, and to keep a handle on the very essence of the ecological estate in which we all dwell. Because if we don't look after it, we only got one planet. We only got one body of water. How we arrange ourselves in this state means making peace ecologically as well as in a human engagement way. I hope that sort of introduction is helpful. Now, I want to say one thing before I close. I am really apologetic here because I have made this appointment to be in this setting and to contribute in a meaningful way, but I have been called away to another thing. And I feel like I've got to have the wisdom of Solomon. Do I cut the baby in half or do I give the baby to someone? I think I can be here and leave a little early if that's okay with everybody. I don't mean to divide my time, but unfortunately I've got cultural things here too. You get called away, you have to go and attend. And I have been so called. So I'm going to predict I'll be gone from here by 1:30 if that's okay with everybody. And please do forgive me for this. Yeah. Anyway, I'm now passing back to you.
Thank you, Helen. Yes, I think it's the nature of networking. If we're all in the same place, some people would have to leave early at some point. And, the rest of us will keep on having a drink or whatever. But yeah, I would actually like to invite Michael Mell, who's up in Mount Hagen in Papua New Guinea. Michael, if you're there, to sort of have a first response to Helen. Michael is many things, and full disclosure is also on my own board, but he is someone with a deep personal lived experience of colonialism, and I think his perspectives is well worth hearing. Michael, are you there?
Yes, James. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Moge, up in Mount Hagen, in the Moge area in PNG. As you know, the Moge are a community surrounded by other communities as well. And I do acknowledge other members of indigenous communities and also members of our general community who have become part of us. Definitely we need to acknowledge that we are now composite in terms of our citizenry, members of community, diverse in our historical backgrounds, but for the fact that we are here together by this mode, I acknowledge everyone and for allowing me to be on your screen. Thank you. Secondly, but equally important, I want to thank Helen for being the first cab off the rank, so to speak, in really sharing that very rich and very connective way of approaching storytelling, very significant way of building peace or peace building in our communities in the past or indeed today and into the future. So thank you, Helen. Very much appreciate that. PNG is obviously a post-colonial location. And in that context, its history is multiple, but in the context of our meeting today, and particularly in terms of peace building, I do go along with what Helen has shared, that our history, particularly Indigenous history, has always been about peacemaking, about peace building, about community well-being, about protecting and retaining and ensuring that our future is in hand and well guarded for those that will follow us. So that's been our real attitude and belief. So I come from a background where peace was our major concern and community well-being was very much that. And I don't want to rap on about it, although it's very easy to make this as a sounding board. And it's been a catch cry from the 50s and the 60s. And through colonialism, of course, things changed. And New Guinea has been depicted as, in many ways, a wild place, a place where natives roamed and things happened. And all sorts of stories have been created and manufactured. And so what from my childhood, peacemaking, to a country that really experienced tumultuous change. The good thing, I think, and in some, I don't want to drag on about that history, but that history is a baggage that's a part of me now. And I do acknowledge it, because without that acknowledgement, then really I can't be truthful about what I say. But I want to come to the present moment. The biggest difference with, I think, with what Helen has shared and what PNG is now in is that politically, we might say PNG is independent. Politically independent. We have our system of government, we have a public service mechanism and a financial system that's very much a part of the world today that we belong to. Many of these things affect us today, but the point I want to make is that being politically independent gives us an opportunity to really relook and re-examine. But unfortunately, in PNG and in many of our locations, there is an attitude, there is a way in which Western civilization has come in, has educated us, but educated us in a particular way. So our own people quite often take on these values, these knowledge systems, and make them our own, to the point where we quite often hold back, suppress, deny our own systems of knowledge. If I can put it rather crudely or bluntly, the enemy, so to speak, that came about through colonization has left us. But its footprints, its impact, continues to affect and affect us. So when you talk about peace building on whose terms, through what mechanisms, with what tools?
Yep.
And I think Papua New Guineans to ourselves, we need to really, really rethink, reconceptualize, or undo ourselves if we really want to find ourselves in terms of our communities, in our ways, and our systems, and our processes. Because the systems that were implanted into us through colonization have a way of obstructing, in fact, have a way of making us sense that there is a reality that we think we have, when in fact we are fairly shallow in many ways. There is a challenge for us, and that aspect of neo-colonization, if I want to put it rather bluntly, that Papua New Guineans themselves are their own worst enemy. Because the enemy has left us. So the enemy has left us, but it's left its footprints, which we are now tussling with. And over the last however many, I mean, we were independent in 75, we are now in 2021. So over some 40 years, we've had the opportunity to rearrange the furniture if we really want to be a nation. But Papua New Guinea being multicultural, the challenge has been major. So my sense of coming back to PNG, while I've enjoyed the privileges of working with the Australian Museum, once again, to put it bluntly, I felt like I was a specimen on the wall. telling white men's history by a Papua New Guinean who lived and worked in Sydney. So my coming back is in some way reorganizing myself to saying, look, I can't be that for which the objects are in collection areas and in museum display shelves, and I have to tell a story. But it's not. I do tell my story, but it's also their story alongside it. And managing that quite often was a major challenge. So my coming away and back to PNG to tell my story on my terms, in my ways, and while I've got Papua New Guineans at large who have changed, in some cases irrevocably, but in some ways, maybe there is an opportunity to re-look at and re-examine and rewrite that story and rewrite some of the history and bring our past to the present so that we can balance the books, so to speak, in terms of being a nation at large. So that's my challenge working in PNG, and that's my story in a very brief way, to saying that PNG represents a cauldron where there are many cultures, but neo-colonization has been and is continuing. It continues to fester us. We have systems that continue to fester us, and now COVID comes in to fester us. And so the challenges are many. And so with Helen, yeah, things are not over. I think the agenda is major. As long as we are prepared to stoke the fire and continue to raise the issues, remind ourselves, I think the journey is going to be long and hard, but I think that's the purpose for which we are here. Thanks.
Thank you. Helen, did you want to respond? What we will do in a moment is we will invite people to comment, and in the spirit of sharing, if you've already had an introduction, just hold back and we'll let those who haven't spoken first. But Helen, I think you should definitely have a chance to say something.
Look, I totally agree, Michael, and the footprints, well, they're always going to be there. You'll never make them lesser. I mean, I look at where I'm living, and I'm speaking on my own country, so that's, I didn't acknowledge my elders or my ancestors, but they are all around me all the time. But my point is, and this is where I'm agreeing with you, Michael, is that just living here and me knowing the name of Bachelor, and this is the example of the impact of what Michael's suggesting, and I'm just going to use it in a small example. Bachelor is located 119 kilometres south of Darwin, and it is a little township with about 600 people who live in it, and it was named Bachelor after a dead Labor politician who lived at the time in South Australia. He didn't do anything here. It's just named after him. But there's also a major river called the Finnis River. And the Finnis River is named after a failed magistrate who was supposed to chain all of Darwin and failed and overspent £45,000. But that river was named after him. He was, what do they call it when the Parliament inquires into someone? Well, they did that, and they found that he was incompetent. They pulled him off chaining the whole of Darwin, and they threw Goiter in, who chained Darwin. And so they've got these places named after these failed or dead people. But you know what? Bachelor's called Ulmalmi. That's the Kungarican word for bachelor. And when you call it something else, you're getting a blanket and you're going, I'm just going to cover that up, and we're going to put this there instead. And that's what Aboriginal or First Nations people see, is the smoke and the mirrors that hide the reality with something that's put on top of what's underneath, what really exists. So when we peel off that blanket that hides the name Ulmalmi, we are seeing the country in its real lived state, because the country, in most Indigenous cultures, has agency in its own self. I hope that I haven't overstepped, Michael, because I felt that what you were saying was so relevant. This footprint, it's not an objection. I've not got any hatred in my heart. It's this, let's pretend that this is this, when it really isn't. It's, let's pretend there's terra nullius. Let's pretend no one was present. Let's pretend that these people don't have any society and they're just talking gibberish. And then we'll just shoot them and kill them. And, you know, like, let's pretend. And in Aboriginal societies, you can't just go and kill someone because you're killing the productivity of survival. This is the, I'm putting my traditional hat on, saying this is the mentality of the traditional society, is that everyone was important. It was egalitarian. Everyone was needed to hunt, to gather, to look after the children and to educate them and to make sure that the knowledge was passed on of all the rules and social obligations that each had to the other and to the greater group. And that's been critically damaged. Then all this other stuff happens and it makes it look like Aboriginal people have no order, and they do. It's been shattered and shaken. It's been fractured. It's been damaged. It isn't irreparable. And that's what's so significant about peace building for First Nations people, is that that is the thing that brought order in their lives, in the traditions. So it can do that again. And how do we force the blasted government to make sure that they have access to all of these tools that are in the United Nations Convention for the Rights of Indigenous People? Because once they employ that and they enshrine it into law, there you are, all the articles there that say right to have access to fair, effective decisions, the right to have disputes managed fairly and effectively, the right to self-determinate, all of them are there. So ADR helps deliver those very things Aboriginal people and First Nations are seeking to have.